Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today I'm bringing you a game from the Blackpool Regional Championships. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, regionals have started again in the UK, and they are in the expanded format. Now, Breakpoint is legal at this tournament, so we are in the format of black and white to Breakpoint. The games are 50 minutes, best of 3, and I should say a huge thank you to Stephanie J and Blackpool Card Group for putting on this regional and allowing us to record. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have these lovely videos to show you. So as always, sit back, grab yourself a nice beverage and enjoy this game from Blackpool Expanded Regionals. Black and white to Breakpoint, 50 minutes, best of 3. Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told I had a voice for radio, so today I am bringing you round 5 from the Blackpool Regional Championship. Now, on the right, we have Scott Simmons, who is going to be playing Mega Manectric, and on the left, we have got Danny Hynam, and he is going to be playing a bit of the old Groudon. So it looks like Scott has won the flip. And it looks like Scott gets to go first. Now, we see him start with Ava Rizian. Now, I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure of the exact build that Scott is playing. We can see a rough seas in his deck there. But clearly we have Ava Rizian here, most likely being played because of its ability which removes special conditions from any Pokemon as long as they have grass energy attached. So Scott straight away uses an Ultra Ball and he grabs a Hooper. And he's using Hooper's ability. And why do we like Hooper's ability? Because it allows us to search for any free EX Pokemon. So he's gone there for a couple of Manectric, and one would presume he is also going to be going for a Shaman. Most people tend to do so. And we see, yeah, so he's already got a Spirit Link and an Energy in his hand that he can attach. So he's going to be drawing at least 4 cards with a Shaman. Yeah, Shaman's got that setup ability that allows you to draw until you have 6 cards in your hand. So, Scott here, it's a nice opening turn. Anytime you can Ultra Ball for a Hooper in an EX heavy deck, you're usually going to be having a pretty good time of it. Obviously, starting with that Virizion in the active is not ideal, but it's certainly not the end of the world. Now, the one thing that we should note here is... Actually, we'll get to that in just a second. So we get the Spirit Link on the Manectric. That means that Scott can Mega Evolve without ending his turn, because usually in order to Mega Evolve, you have to end your turn. And then he gets an energy on the Manectric, getting it ready for next turn. So he's got the energy, he's got the Spirit Link. It looks like he's got... Has he got an Ultra Ball in hand from earlier? Which will allow him to get the Mega next turn. Or he could play that N, which of course allows him to shuffle his hand into his deck, or both players in fact, and draw until they've got the same number of cards as their prizes. But he's looking there, he's got a Flash Energy in hand, he's got an Ultra Ball, so he doesn't want to play the N. He likes his hand as it is. Now what the Flash Energy will do is it will remove weakness. And that's where we need to go with this, because Scott's main attacker there, the Manectric, is weak to fighting. Groudon, of course, is a fighting type Pokemon. So Danny is going to have a field day. Oh, and as a Rosic comes down, allowing Danny to discard a tool or a special energy attached to one of Scott's Pokemon, he gets rid of the Spirit Link, and then he plays that Tropical Beach, which allows him to draw until he's got 7 cards in hand and end his turn. So there goes that Flash Energy, and if Scott wants to Mega Evolve without ending his turn, he's going to have to find another Spirit Link. Now, of course, there is an argument, why didn't Scott wait until the end of his turn? Excuse me, why didn't he wait until this turn to play the Spirit Link, so that Danny didn't have a turn to get rid of it? Well, the answer is, of course, he used Shaman's setup ability to draw until he had 6 cards in hand. Had he kept the Spirit Link in hand, that would have drawn him 1 less card with the Shaman. And you don't expect, you expect a Groudon player to be playing a single Xerosic. Chances of them playing that on turn 1, not terribly high. Now, the thing about Groudon is, it's a pretty slow deck. So, Danny there, he attaches a tool, although, to be honest, a pretty useless tool. Well, actually, no, it's not useless. I say useless. Of course, the Assault Vest reduces damage done by 40 if the Pokemon attacking you has a special energy attached. Now, usually, Manectric does not worry about having special energy attached. But, of course, Scott needs to attach the Flash Energy in order to take away the weakness from Groudon. And let's not forget that now, with the Flash Energy attached, that Assault Vest really comes into its own. So Scott here is playing a Battle Compressor. It allows him to discard 3 cards from his deck. He's going for a couple of energy. Mega Manectric's attack does 110 damage and allows you to attach 2 basic energy from your discard to one of your bench Pokemon. So of course, using a Battle Compressor to pop that energy in the discard is pretty gosh darn useful. Also a Juniper so that he can reuse it with a VS Seeker later on. And now we see an end. Both players shuffle their hands into their decks, I should say, and as neither player has taken a prize, they both get 6 cards. While we're here, does anyone else think it's just a little bit ironic that Scott's using a Groudon mat and Danny isn't using a Groudon mat? Seems a little bit the wrong way round, to be honest, ladies and gentlemen. Now, what I was going to say a minute ago was that Virizion can actually... He is a grass type, so he could be hitting Danny for weakness here. But I don't imagine that Scott plays all that much grass energy, if I'm honest. You need 2 grass energy on Virizion. He only does 40 damage, 80 with weakness, and Scott can do 110 with Manectric. Now, here's an interesting one. Now, he's only doing 60 damage at the moment. He's going to need to Mega Revolve or put a Muscle Band to KO that 70 HP Jirachi. Scott's used that Escape Rope to, first of all, get his Virizion out of the active and his Manectric into the active, but also to force Danny to pop that Jirachi into the active. Now, here's another interesting play, because Jirachi's attack discards a... Or is that 60 HP Jirachi? Am I going crazy? I think I might be going crazy, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to double check that nice and quickly, just so I don't look like too much of an idiot. So, what Jirachi could have done, it is 60 HP, I'm going silly. And obviously Manectric's Assault Laser attack does 60 damage. I'm getting caught up with other 70 HP basic Pokemon. So Jirachi would have been able to... Well, Jirachi discards a special... does 10 damage and discards a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And he would have been able to do 10 damage to the Manectric. Actually, no damage, sorry, because Manectric, I believe, is resistant to metal. And he would have been able to get rid of that Flash energy. But, of course, he can't get rid of the Flash energy if... he doesn't come up, if Scott just gets him going nice and early. And yeah, Manectric does resist metal, so actually Jirachi would have done nothing. But after discarding the special energy, Jirachi then has immunity for a turn. He can't be hurt. As long as he stays in the active, of course. So Danny doesn't get to get rid of the Flash energy with the Jirachi, so instead he just uses VS Seeker, gets that Xerosic back, and then gets rid of the Flash energy. Danny really seems to be going after that Flash energy. He also evolved into Primal Groudon, and in doing so, ended his turn. Now, Scott here is going to be able to do 110 to that Primal Groudon. But then Danny is not going to be able to get the KO next turn without something like a Mega Turbo, because Primal Groudon's attack takes 4 energy to do. Now, the good news is Primal Groudon also has a huge amount of HP. And Manectric doesn't actually 2-hit as it is. Primal Groudon's got 240 HP, and Manectric does, Mega Manectric does 110. So really, in order to get a 2-hit KO, Scott is going to want to not Mega Revolve, because as long as your opponent has a tool attached, Manectric EX does 120. 2 attacks of 120 is 240 and the KO. So if Scott were to Mega Revolve here, then he's actually not going to be getting a 2-hit KO. He can only get the 2-hit KO if he doesn't Mega Revolve. Now, even if Scott Mega Revolves, and even if Scott has a Flash energy attached, Primal Groudon, if there's a Stadium in play, does 200 damage. Add on 2 strong energy to that, and you're doing 240. one strong energy does 220, Mega Manectric only has 210. So even if Scott has a flash energy on a Mega Manectric, Groudon will still be 2-hit KOing pretty easy. One-hit KOing pretty gosh darned easily. Although, truth be told, Danny's already attached an energy this turn. He needs to get that Groudon out of the active, or it's gonna get KO'd next turn. It's gonna get knocked out by that Manectric. And that's going to be a little bit of a problem because it's his only Pokemon. Now, one cool thing about that Jirachi play from Danny is that it didn't really cost him anything. Because, here's a fun little play. He's going for a Mega Turbo. So he's using that computer search to discard a fighting energy and something else. He can then search for the item card Mega Turbo, which allows you to attach a basic energy from your discard pile to a Mega Evolved Pokemon. So what he's going to be able to do is put the fighting energy in the discard using computer search, then use that computer search to grab a Mega Turbo, then he has got 4 energy on that Primal Groudon, and then he is doing, well, without a flash energy, he's actually doing a huge amount of damage. Now, he has got to discard the stadium, but he then will need a stadium if Scott gets the flash energy. So here he's actually going to be doing 440 damage to that Manectric. Oh, and there goes some Robo Subs. So it does 100 damage. There is a stadium in play. You have to discard the stadium to do 200. Plus the 20 for strong energy is 220. Times 2 for the weakness is 440. Now, even if Scott doesn't get a flash energy on here, then it's a KO. If Scott does get a flash energy, Danny just needs to put any stadium in play, and then he can do 220 and KO through the flash energy. So as much as we saw Danny go to a whole bunch of effort to get rid of that flash energy, it's not actually the end of the world, because Primal Groudon doesn't really worry about one-hit KOing Mega Manectric, even with the flash energy. Now, the big problem for Danny here, for Scott, is going to be trying to prevent Danny taking KOs. Now, the good news for Scott is that Danny is, he's treading water a little bit now. He's got his Primal Groudon set up, but there's no Groudon on the bench. There's no energy. Now, the good news is we can see that Danny has a Korrina in hand, so he's going to be able to do so. But Scott here is going to basically have to retreat into his Hooper or Virizion and hope that Danny doesn't have a stadium. If he does have a stadium, he's got the KO anyway. At the moment, Scott can't just leave that Manectric in the active, because to do so would mean a definite KO. Now, we do see an N from Scott here, so Danny's going to get 4 cards off that N, and Scott is going to get 5. Now, the good news, and this is what we see from Danny's deck, it's very much, look, I'm just going to sit here until I get a Primal Groudon set up, and as soon as I do, I'm in a brilliant position. Now, those Robo-Subs only have 30 HP, but essentially, when they get KO'd, nothing happens. Scott doesn't take a prize. So, Danny is going to want to put those Robo-Subs in the active and just basically sit there and go, okay, my Groudon's on the bench, I'm just going to chill behind some Robo-Subs while I get the 4 energy required. And as soon as he Primal evolves the Groudon, he's got that ancient trait, that Omega Barrier, which means that Scott cannot use something like a Lysander to bring it up into the active. It says that whenever your opponent plays a trainer card, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. So as I've said, Scott retreats into that Virizion. Why? Virizion isn't weak. So Danny needs to get a stadium here in order to do 220 damage and get the KO. Now, the good news is, now does Danny have a Lysander in the discard pile? Because he's got a VS Seeker, and if he could Lysander and KO that Manectric, the game would basically be over. because one of the things about this Mega Manectric deck, it attacks for 2 energy, and when you attack with 1 Mega Manectric, you get to attach 2 energy to a bench Pokemon, and the deck essentially self-perpetuates. But the problem is, when you get all your energy knocked off the field, like has happened to Scott, you end up with a situation where you've got to have 2 manual attachments, 2 turns, before you've got enough energy on the field to start mounting some proper attacks. I know that you can use Overrun to do 20 to the active, 20 to the bench. It ain't going to do much good. Now, not only will Danny need a Lysander to bring that Manectric into the active, but of course he's only actually doing 120 damage as it stands. He is going to need either a Stadium or some way to get rid of that flash energy in order to get a one-hit KO. So it looks like we're seeing an N here. Looks like a VS Seeker for an N. So he didn't have the Lysander. To be honest, even if he did, I mean, he could have KO'd the Mega Manectric on the bench, but that makes him more susceptible to an N from Scott. And, you know, there's no real point KOing that Mega Manectric on the bench right now. If he's going to take 2 cheap prizes, he might as well KO the Virizion. What he really wants to do is take out that Manectric on the bench. Now, we don't see a Stadium coming down here, unfortunately. We do see a Wobbuffet, who could be quite useful. When he's active, he turns off all the abilities on the entire field, other than for Psychic Pokemon. Oh, so Scott's gotten a bit of a break here. We see 120 damage to the Virizion, but there is no KO yet. That Virizion will live to fight another day. And now the question is, what can Scott do? Now, here's the awkward thing. Scott got that flash energy onto the Manectric, and that basically said, right, I'm good. I cannot get Lysandered and KO'd as I am. Danny's going to have to find a Stadium. But the problem now is he's got a special energy attached, which means that he cannot get the KO on that Groudon. Now that he's Mega Evolved, he's only doing 110. Add the 120 on the Primal Groudon, puts him on 230, which isn't enough for a KO anyway. But with the Assault Vest, that means that Mega Manectric's only actually doing 70 damage. So he's going to be 2-hit KOing the Primal Groudon. And as I've said, if Danny can find a Stadium to stick down, that's going to do good. That's going to be it, allow him to get the KO. Now, did Danny not play that Focus Sash? Does Danny have a Focus Sash in hand? Did I miss that? Now, what we see from Scott here is a Jamming Net. Now, that does 2 things. Number 1, it means that attacks from that Groudon will do 20 damage less. Number 2, it means that Danny cannot play something like a Spirit Link on the Groudon in order to allow him to Primal Evolve without ending his turn. Oh, and now we do see a Lysander just to take those 2 cheeky prizes. He doesn't need a Stadium down to KO that Mega Manectric, so he does it, and now he's down to 2 prizes remaining, and Scott's going to be looking for an N. But it also means that something like, I've already discussed how annoying that Assault Vest can be for Scott. Scott really wants that flash energy to take away the weakness to Primal Groudon, but of course that flash energy means that Danny can play Assault Vest, and it really does quite a lot of good. So by playing that Jamming Net, it means there will be no Assault Vest coming down, and that's pretty gosh darn useful, to be perfectly honest, ladies and gentlemen. It does quite a lot of good. So, and now we see a Lysander onto that Groudon. Now, here's an interesting play. Like I've said, Primal Groudon has the Ancient trait, which means that you are not going to be Lysandered into the active. Your opponent cannot play a Lysander to pull a Primal Groudon into the active, because that's a trainer card that would affect it, so it does nothing. Your opponent can play the Lysander, they can take it out of their hand, it will just have no effect on the Groudon. I believe that's the ruling. Feel free to moan at me in the comments and tell me I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what happens. Because it doesn't say your opponent can't play the card. It reads, whenever your opponent plays a trainer card, prevent all effects of that card. So you can play the Lysander and target the Groudon, the Lysander gets played and it essentially does nothing. Now Scott here is having a bit of an energy drought, and that is less than ideal. He's 2 turns in a row now. He hasn't had an energy to put onto that Mega Manectric, which means he's not been able to attack with that Mega Manectric and do 110 damage. Now, we do see an Enhanced Hammer coming down here, and Danny's deck is not a fan of special energy. Between the Jirachi, the Zerosic, and the Enhanced Hammer, Danny loves getting rid of that special energy. Oh, and here is an Escape Rope, and there is no good option for Danny here. For Scott, it's got to be the Virizion going in the active. Danny pops a Robo-Sub up. And actually, what would be ideal for Danny here would be to get a Primal Groudon. He plays a Juniper there to discard his hand and draw 7 more cards. Oh, and he's got it. He's got 2, in fact. Oh, I couldn't get all 3. To be honest, he probably doesn't play all 3. Rarely do decks play 4 Megas. So he's got the Robo-Sub in the active. It makes no difference if he ends his turn to Primal Evolve. So, to be honest, he might as well. What's the downside? Now, obviously, he's going to want to play every card he can in his hand before he Primal Evolves. Now, the question is, does he switch here into the Wobbuffet? He does. Why would he do that? Just to lower Scott's options. Now, he puts a Floatstone on the Wobbuffet so we can get the Wobbuffet out of the active whenever he likes. I think you can see my shoes there on the side of Danny. I believe they're my shoes. You don't need to know that, but they certainly look a lot like my shoes. And I was certainly hanging around the streaming table when my games... So round 5, I think that might have been a round my opponent didn't bother playing. Or it might have just been a round I finished quite early. I can't remember. It was a little while ago now. Go back to my podcast and have a listen. Anyway, that's not terribly relevant. Danny here, he's got 2 Primal Groudons. He's buying himself some time. And as I said before, Scott wants that N. Oh, and Danny had a good hand. VS Seeker to reuse any supporter he liked and an N. That's pretty good going. Now we see here, Scott's still got 5 prizes remaining. And here's the problem when you face Primal Groudon decks. Those things are beefy. They're slow, but they're beefy. 240 HP. And you can play things like Assault Vest or even Focus Sash to make them even beefier again. But they're slow. So if you can take down a Primal Groudon nice and early, your opponent basically sits there and cries. Which is good for you. You want your opponent crying. So in that situation, you take down the Primal Groudon early, your opponent runs out of steam, and you take a whole bunch of prizes. And the challenge for Primal Groudon players often is not getting the first Primal Groudon up. It's getting the second and maybe even the third Primal Groudons to keep that stream of KOs coming after your first Primal Groudon goes down. And the aim when you're playing against a Primal Groudon deck is to be able to take down that Primal Groudon before your opponent can get a second one going. And here's the issue here with what Scott's not been able to do. He's not taken down that first Primal Groudon, and Danny here is just building up, and honestly it looks like Scott might deck out soon. So not ideal. Now, I should mention Scott's mat at this point. He is a regional champion. It might even have been, I mean, him and his Scott plays, he is Scott. His son Seb plays Pokemon as well, and there was a wonderful regional earlier in the year, I want to say in Newport, where Scott and his son Seb actually both won the regional championship, playing the same Manectric bats list. And, you know, father and son both took the same regionals. Father in Masters, son in Seniors, which really was quite funky. Scott, I should mention, also got top 8 at the European... Oh, and there we go. Danny can retreat the Wobbuffet, put the Primal Groudon into the active. He's got a stadium to put down, so he can one-hit KO that Virizion by doing 220 damage. So at the recent European Challenge Cup, Scott was the British chap who played his Mega Mewtwo deck all the way to a top 4 finish, being the highest UK finisher of the year, unfortunately being paired against the also British Tamal Cameron in top 8. It's really upsetting when 2 players from the same country make top 8 at a big international tournament and then have to play each other in top 8. Danny, of course, no slouch himself, very good player. I believe he's played at Worlds before. Scott is actually on for a top 22 finish this year. It's far from guaranteed, but he is in with a shout, shall we say. And even if Scott doesn't make top 22, giving him that's where he has in Europe, the 22 best players by championship points gained in tournaments get a free trip to Worlds. They get their accommodation and their flights paid for to San Francisco, as well as getting a day 2 invitation, which is, of course, far more prestigious than the free-for-all that is the day 1 invite. Now, as it happens, Scott is probably going to get a free trip to Worlds anyway, because his son Seb, who happens to be under 18, is very, very good at this game and is looking like a very, very strong bet for top 22. And if you are under 18 and you make top 22 in any age division, then you get a paid day 2 invite, and your Guardian does not get a day. Oh, that's Scott's ECC burn and poison counter. And although you don't get a paid invite, a day 2 invite, or the Guardian doesn't, the Guardian does get a free trip to Worlds and the hotel and all that. So the good news for Scott is, even if he doesn't meet top 22 and get a day 2 invite, he is looking like he's likely to actually get a paid invite regardless. Well, in essentially a paid invite, because he'll have the invite and his son will essentially be winning him a free trip to San Francisco. And when I have kids, ladies and gentlemen, I want my kids to get me a free trip to San Francisco. Yeah, just muted it quickly while I cough, because nobody wants to sit here listening to me coughing. Like I've said, Danny is no slouch at big tournaments. He is no stranger to top cutting. He's a very good player. Doesn't travel as much as a lot of players, but still a very, very good player indeed. Certainly not one to be messed with. Heck, it's round 5, and by the time we get to round 5, I am somewhat shamelessly so trying to get people on stream who are good players playing interesting decks. We haven't had a Groudon deck on a PTCGRadio stream for a little while, so it seems only fair that we should get one on here today. Oh, here's the thing. Here's what I'm thinking. Scott gets to go first. Obviously, he lost game 1. Danny started Jirachi, and on the one hand, I'm thinking, if Scott puts down a Flash Energy, Danny can pop down an energy on the Jirachi and get rid of it. Now, first of all, there's no way Scott's putting a Flash Energy down when he's got a Jirachi opposite. And the other thing to remember is, of course, that Danny, he wants to get 4 energy on the Groudon. His deck is slow. It is sometimes worth putting the energy on the Jirachi. I mean, you lose a turn of energy attachment, but you kind of gain a turn by just blocking your opponent for a turn. But even so, you really want that energy going on the Groudon. So we see an Ultra Ball from Scott, and if it's not prized, he's going to be going for Hooper. Why would you go for anything other than Hooper? Oh, and is it prized? You would imagine he'd have taken it out of the deck by now if it wasn't prized. And it must be, the fact he hasn't got it yet means it must be prized. And that's unfortunate. Like I said in the first game, when you're playing these EX heavy decks, Hooper is just so good, allowing you to be able to search your deck and grab any free EXs you like. You can go and get a Manectric, you can get a Mega Manectric for the following turn if you like, or you can go ahead and get yourself a Shaman to draw more cards, and it's just a Mega Manectric ready for next turn. An argument may be that he should have gone for a Shaman to draw more cards, but first of all, he doesn't need to draw more cards. Look at his hand. Next turn, he's got Mega Manectric, he's got Energy, he's got N. So next turn, he puts the Energy on the Mega Manectric, the Manectric, he Mega Evolves it, he's got the Spirit Link already attached, then he plays the N to draw more cards. The other thing is, we've seen that Danny, After Groudon uses his attack to do a whole bunch of damage and get rid of the stadium, it then can, unless you can draw into a new stadium, it can be difficult to KO non-fighting weak EXs. Unless those EXs happen to be Shaman and have 110 HP. Now, a resistance to fighting, it should be mentioned. But one strong energy on that Groudon and Shaman goes down, ladies and gentlemen. So, it really is a nice situation to be in. That, you know, for Danny, if your opponent puts a whole bunch of Shaman down, you can sit there and be happy. Now, is Danny going to go for a Zerosic here? There is an argument. No, he's going to go for a Tropical Beach to draw more cards. Now, like I said, Danny here, he's not playing a fast game. He's playing a slow game. He wants to get his Groudon on the bench. He wants to Mega Evolve. He wants to get a whole bunch of energy on there. And he wants to basically leave Groudon on the bench, Mega Evolving. Or he has got a Lysander here, which he can use to be very annoying. Bring up the Shaman, force Scott to have some way of bringing it out the active. And, of course, well, when there is a Zerosic, you also get to go ahead and get an extra card from Tropical Beach. Remember, you draw until you got 7 cards in hand. So by playing that Lysander, you have 1 less card in hand, which means you get to draw 1 more with Tropical Beach. And you can always use VS Seeker to grab that Lysander out of the discard and play it again. So Scott does exactly what we knew Scott was going to be doing. He pops down the energy, Mega Evolves the Mega Manectric, and plays the N. Does he grab... Now he's going to want to grab a Float Stone here, or an Escape Rope, or any way he can to get that Shaman out of the active. And it... Now... doesn't look like he's got it, which is a real shame because he's got that Battle Compressor. Now, that Battle Compressor would be hugely useful right now, because what you do is you use Battle Compressor to drop some energy into the discard pile, and then you attack with Mega Manectric, and oh look, there is exactly the energy I want in the discard pile. I can now attach them to the Manectric on the bench, and then I'm not going to run into that situation I had in the previous game, where I ran out of energy and couldn't attack. Now, we do see a Lysander coming down into the discard pile. And is Scott going to pop any energy down? I mean, if he was going to attack with a Mega Manectric, it's very easy. You do... Okay, and it looks like he is. I mean, Danny's not KOing that Mega Manectric this turn. So Danny knows he's going to... Scott knows he's going to have a chance to attack with that Mega Manectric. I mean, next turn, worst case scenario, he can just attach an energy to Shaman and manually retreat. So he knows he's going to be attacking with a Manectric next turn, so he might as well have the energy in the discard ready for that. And of course, as he's got no attack, he can use Danny's Tropical Beach, because stadiums apply to both players equally, he can use Danny's Tropical Beach to draw some more cards at the end of his turn. Now, Danny wants to Mega Evolve here. That's going to be a big thing. Scott wants to use that Lysander. We know he's popped it in the discard pile. If Danny Mega Evolves... Scott cannot use a Lysander to bring that then Primal Groudon active, and here comes an N from Danny, because of that Omega Barrier Ancient trait. If he doesn't get the Primal Evolution this turn, it means Scott can drag it into the active, do 110, attach an energy to, or attach 2 energy to that Manectric at the same time, and now Danny is in real danger of losing the Groudon EX and all of his energy. And it takes 4 energy on a Groudon EX to one-hit KO a Mega Manectric. The non-primal does have an attack that does 130 for 4 energy, but Danny ain't going to have 4 energy next turn. Oh, but he gets the Primal Groudon, and that's really, really big here. That's huge. He also gets the Wobbuffet and the 2 Robo Subs. They're just going to save him a bit of time. But this is really big. Scott wanted that Lysander next turn. As it is now, Danny gets to Primal Evolve the Groudon, and now Scott can't bring that Groudon into the active. Now that Focus Sash will stop the Groudon being one-hit KO'd. That's irrelevant. Manectric cannot one-hit KO him anyway. But we've seen that Scott plays a Jamming Net. So what that means is that Scott now can't play the Jamming Net onto the Groudon, which means he's not going to be reducing the amount of damage he does, which is kind of funky. So Danny here, this is exactly what Danny wants. He sits there, he's got a Primal Groudon, and he's under no stress whatsoever. He can let Scott take a couple of prizes. It's really not an issue. He can let Scott take the Jirachi. Scott can even play a Lysander and KO the Wobbuffet if he really wants to. Danny is just going to want to set up his Groudon. And after he's set up his Groudon, he's going to come forward and he's going to try and take 3 EX KOs in 3 turns to win the game. And it really is as simple as that. Scott, it's so awkward for Scott here because he can't Lysander the Primal Groudon. And if he starts just knocking out the Robo Substitutes, well, brilliant. He knocks out the Robo Substitutes, and what's Danny going to do? He's going to bring the Primal Groudon into the active, and that is going to metaphorically punch Manectric in the face. And Manectric's face is weak to Groudon's fist. And that is not a good situation to be in. It's a very bad matchup for Scott. Honestly, this is a kind of matchup where I wanted you to see Scott's deck. It's a very good deck. I wanted you to see Danny's deck. It's a very good deck. And these are 2 very, very good players. But make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen. This is a match where there is a clear favourite. Now, it ain't no guarantee, ladies and gentlemen. No guarantee whatsoever. Scott can rush Danny. Scott can use flash energy and blah, blah, blah. This is not an unwinnable game. Excuse me, that was weird. This is not an unwinnable game for Scott. But oh my goodness, is it unfavourable. We should mention, of course, that Danny is using Kyogre and Groudon sleeves, so that's not the end of the world. You know, he's representing. And Scott is using Hooper sleeves in a deck that very much relies on Hooper. Now, the question there, of course, was, I think Scott momentarily forgot about the Tropical Beach. He evolved, he passed. It's a Spirit Link, so it didn't end his turn. And then he was like, oh, hang on a second, I'm Tropical Beaching instead. Danny's a lovely chap, I'm going to be honest. I know Danny, he's a nice chap. So rather than go, you've already ended your turn, wah-ha-ha-ha-ha, Danny's like, well, of course you're going to Tropical Beach. Go ahead, draw those couple of cards. Or maybe Danny's just thinking, you know what? I'm under no pressure here. You have your couple of cards. I am going to win. Now, Corinna here is a really good card for Danny. It allows him to search his deck for a fighting Pokemon and an item card, an item card, I should say, if I'm going to use correct English. And he can use the item card to grab those 2 energy. And remember what I've been saying all game here. Danny wants to get the Groudon down. Danny wants to get an energy every turn and just be attaching that energy. Man, I'm forgetting to speak tonight. And every turn he wants to go attach an energy. And then by the time he brings that Groudon into the active and starts smashing, he's going to want another Groudon on the bench and he's going to want to start smashing with that Groudon. So what that Corinna allows him to do is set up. Now, the question is, does he bench that Groudon? Clearly he's thinking, if I bench it, then Scott can maybe jamming net it, or he can bring it into the active with Lysander. How do I play this? Well, here's the thing. I would argue he probably should, especially we haven't seen a Spirit Link yet. He probably should bench it sooner rather than later. Because what he's going to want to do is Primal Evolve it, and it's going to end his turn. So it is worth Primal Evolving it and ending your turn sooner rather than later, because otherwise... Oh, and there goes the Tropical Beach. Otherwise, he's in a situation where he and there comes that jamming net straight away. Because otherwise, of course, there is a potential situation where Scott goes ahead and, starts getting a bit of a little... Danny's sitting there and he's wants to attack with his Primal Groudon, but he can't because he's having to lose a turn just Primal Evolving. Now, there is no Flash energy there. We know Danny's got a 4th energy. We know he's getting the KO on this Mega Manectric. And this is very mean for Scott because you're thinking, well, hang on a second. What is Scott supposed to do here? Because that Primal Groudon is getting a 1-hit KO. Now, let's say Scott brings up his bench Mega Manectric. Well, he's doing 110 damage. That is not enough to 2-hit KO. And even if he puts a flash energy on it, firstly, Danny just needs a stadium to get the KO, and secondly, we happen to know that Danny has an enhanced hammer in hand, and he can use that enhanced hammer to get rid of the flash energy. So that Mega Manectric goes down. Danny takes 2 prizes. Next turn, Danny is taking another 2 prizes, and how is Scott KOing this Primal Groudon? Now, in this particular meta, there's a whole bunch of Evil Towels. And Scott can take down those Evil Towel decks. And there's a whole bunch of Trevenant. And as much as they're annoying, Manectric isn't that bad against Trevenant. You can heal yourself with Rough Seas and all of that. It's a winnable game. But Groudon, and there was not very much Groudon at this tournament. There were a few Groudon decks here and there. It was not a particularly well-represented deck. Oh, that is a Cassius. What it does is it allows you to... Oh, and Scott just concedes there. He knows there's no way he's going to win this game. Cassius basically allows you to shuffle one of your Pokemon and all cards attached to it into your bench. Into your deck, I should say. So Scott there, a valiant effort, but he recognises that there is no way he's going to win this game. Primal Groudon's going to come up. Scott's taken 0 prizes. Danny is down to 2 prizes remaining. He's got a fully powered and completely untouched Primal Groudon. Oh my goodness, Scott gave it a go, but oh my goodness, there was nothing he could do in that round. So congratulations to Danny, who moves on, and we're going to be seeing Scott again in 2 rounds' time. I won't tell you if Scott makes top cut or not, but I will tell you he has a win and in against Luke Kirkham's Sizor deck, and that is going to be coming up in round 7. Before that, in round 6, we have got Evil Towel against Evil Towel. Boom. It's going to be fun. As always, ladies and gentlemen, click that like button. I don't even need an appendix today, although I'm sure there's been some mistake by myself or the players. That is what the comment section is for. Make any comment you wish. I enjoy reading your comments, except for the really mean ones, but I'll get over them in time. Click that like button. It takes but a second. Scott, if you're watching this, click the like button. And Phil, go on, Phil. Click the like button. If anybody watching this is called Phil and hasn't clicked the like button yet, who are you? And of course, make sure you subscribe. And if you've already subscribed, your homework is to find a friend to subscribe on your behalf. As always, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. Look after yourselves till next time. I'll be back with more videos regarding both Pokken and, indeed, Pokemon trading card game very shortly indeed. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.